I'm joined today by Brenda Chen, and we're going to be talking about Chrysalis, which is her VR game. So Brenda, thank you for taking some time to talk with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you on board. So why don't, to get the conversation rolling, you give us a pitch for Chrysalis? What is it? Why should people be interested?
Cool. So, Chrysalis is a VR adventure game. It's super wacky. In the game, you're traveling at sea, and then you get swallowed by a giant sea creature, and you go on an adventure in its belly. So, along the way, you get to explore this magical underwater world that takes place inside this creature's belly and meet other weird creatures like a blobfish, like lobster, and other different things. I don't want to spoil it. And together, you work with them to solve a puzzle to find a way to escape. And you should play it um, because it's it's kind of like a artsy, weird experience if you're into that kind of stuff. It's also like a casual VR game, so you don't have to have any experience playing VR, and you don't have to have any like strong like gameplay skills. It's kind of a game that's suitable for everyone and children because there's no curse words.
Ah, perfect. You mentioned something I was going to bring up later, but I'll jump right into it. Which is this kind of weird tonal thing, and doing a little research on the game before we talked. I was looking through all the different reviews people had posted on the story page, and universally people were saying this is a really funky, really weird game. So I wanted to talk about that from like kind of a tonal perspective. So why did you kind of approach the game in making it this kind of funky experience, especially in regards to why you set it underwater? Because that's the thing I wanted to know is how do those two things combine, this underwater setting and the funkiness of it?
So I kind of think of my games as like extensions of my art, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like a really weird artist. Like I just like designing like creepy, cute creatures. And so I thought it'd be kind of cool to like bring that to life in VR. And then the whole underwater thing, honestly, like my friends make fun of me so much because this isn't my first like underwater game. Were you at Indiecade by any
I
chance?
wasn't, but
Or last year?
no.
Oh, okay. But I made another VR installation called Santiago, which revolves around a giant fish god sculpture that you're actually touching and playing with in VR. Um, and so my friends think I have a weird obsession with fish. And honestly, like I've just been fascinated by the ocean ever since I was little. And I don't know where it came from because like I don't even go to the beach that much or like aquariums. But I don't know, like the underwater world is something that's so familiar, but also so alien to me. And
Mm.
I think that's kind of what drew me to it. Because with Chrysalis, I really just want to transport people to an alternate universe and take them on a magical journey through a world that would never exist in reality. And I felt like the ocean or underwater is a place that would give me a lot of artistic freedom for creating characters. Like we have a blobfish character,
Mm-hmm.
and like also for world building, like I could make something super weird and no one would question it because you can't tell me that that doesn't happen in the ocean because you don't know. Like we've only, explored part of it. So I think that's like what really drew me towards that.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a great thing to tap into. You also mentioned that the game was kind of family friendly, but one of the things that really stuck out to me was that in all the literature you have about Chrysalis, you talk about how it's a game that kind of you get what you put into it. It's a progress at your own rate kind of experience. So I wanted to ask about that design choice in creating a game that there's not necessarily a set cadence to, and if that was something that was easier because you were doing it in VR, or if it was something that kind of was a hurdle.
Mhm. I think it was definitely a hurdle because when you create a game where you progress at your own rate and you don't know what players are going to choose, you have to think of like all the possible scenarios.
Mm.
So a lot of Chrysalis is like wandering through corridors. So for example, it's like if someone doesn't go down this one corridor, what if they like miss an important story beat? So we have to
Mm.
design it in a way that like all the important parts are parts that we make sure the players access. And also we have to make sure we write the story in such a way that if you digest it in like a non-chronological order, it still makes sense. Um, Sorry, what was the other part of your
Oh,
question?
I was just wondering about kind of the hurdles that VR itself
Oh,
kind of
okay.
presented, not necessarily in regards to the progress at your own rate, but kind of in general, in creating this world and the building that seems to have gone on in Chrysalis. Was VR sometimes something that was really helpful, or was it something you had to kind of design around, I guess?
I've only made VR games so
Mm-hmm.
far, so I'm not really sure what it would be like to make like I guess a PC game.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with VR, you don't have like a set camera angle.
Mm.
You have to make sure like your 3D models and all your textures look good from every angle. And something that would look good on the screen might not look good in VR. So a lot of times we have to
Mm.
jump back and forth between like reality and the virtual world to make sure everything's scaled correctly. Because a lot of times in Unity, I'll have this like environment and I'm like, that looks great. And then I jump into the headset and I'm like, this feels so weird. I have to like adjust like back and forth, like scale and like lighting. And then with VR too, we also had to deal with like optimization
Mm.
because it has to like run on the Rift. And so we had to do a lot of like texture baking, reducing some textures. So some of the textures are kind of blurry, but it's like, you know. And then we wanted it to be super pretty too, because I have
Mm.
an arts background. So like that's like really important to me. And so I was like, we must have fog. And then another person on my team was like, oh, but fog's like taxing. And I was like, no, we have to make it work.
I have my standards and I'm sticking to them.
Exactly. I was like, we must have these particles. And I remember one time too, like right before launch, one of my friends on the team had changed a setting in Unity so that instead of having, I think it was like 4 subdivisions for joints or something like that, for character rigging, it only had 2. And so like my blobfish character was moving all like weird and like cranky. And then his like body parts were like going through each other. And I was like, we can't ship it like this. But like he had changed all these settings and like didn't know what he changed. And so he was like, it's fine. And I was like, it's not fine.
No, that's good. Gotta
I
have a
spent like
standard
a
to stick
whole
to.
Yeah, I spent like a whole day just digging through different Unity settings, like trying to find what he had changed. And it was like this weird, I think like project setting thing. When I finally changed it back, I was like, yes, so much better. But yeah, so it's just like, it was a lot of optimization. I think that's like the biggest challenge with VR. And nausea. So like,
Yeah,
if you,
that's actually something I kind of had going in the back of my head, but it's
yeah,
something that everybody I've talked to that does VR kind of has to struggle with this aspect of nausea. And I've played some VR games that have given me nausea and some that haven't. So what is that like as a hurdle to deal with in the fact that you're gonna have some people playing that pretty
yeah,
much can't play your game?
for sure. Yeah, it's something you can't really avoid. Like, there's a lot of best practices for like non-nauseating movement in VR that we tried to implement. So the biggest problem is that you see yourself moving, but you don't feel yourself moving, and so that
Mm.
like disconnect makes you want to throw up, which is understandable. So a lot of time, a good like I guess best practice would be to have something to focus on so that you're not really realizing all that movement, or to kind of like put a vignette to kind of close in like a scene to focus
Mm.
on and not having peripheral. So what we do in our game is we have the vignette come in anytime you're like moving, it kind of like comes in. And then if
Oh
you're
yeah.
faster, it like comes in more. So we try to use that. And then we have like 2 different speeds of movement so that if you're like nauseated, you can go a little bit slower. And then we also made it so that you move in the direction that your controllers are pointing so that you
Mm.
can also like look at other things like while you're swimming. And so we really tried to like optimize for nausea, and we like I forced all my friends who get nauseous in VR to play it
Mm.
so I could
Oh,
test it.
that's nice.
Um, and they were just like, I hate you. But we were able to make it, I think, a lot better. But it's just something that nobody has figured out yet. Like
Mm.
every game that involves like moving a camera, will have people that become nauseous. And it's not something that we figured out yet.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting to see as VR kind of continues to be developed and utilized by indie devs how people address it.
Yeah.
I've run into devs that have had vastly different
Yeah.
solutions, so it's always cool to hear how people are addressing that.
Mhm.
Um, I should mention that down in the description below of this video, there will be a link to Chrysalis. So if any of this sounds interesting to anybody watching this, you can go ahead and check it out. But moving from talking about the game, I'd love to know about your background and what kind of drew you to the world of independent game design and specifically to VR.
So I actually got into indie games like on accident. Um, so I am I was a fine artist. So in high school, like I did a lot of drawing, painting, sculpting, like everything. And then when I got to college, at USC where I am right now, I discovered VR by just like wandering into like a lab. I like to explore the buildings at school, so I just kind of like walk around and go places I'm not supposed to. And so I walked into a lab one day, and I met another animation major in there who like was like, "Yo, like I have this cool project. Like, you want to work on it?" And so like I did, and that's how I learned about VR. And then sophomore year of college, I got the idea for the first VR game I ever made called Santiago, which is the tactile experience I was talking about. So I was curious about what it would be like to like see something in VR and then reach out and actually like touch it. So I made like kind of like a dance party simulator where I made a giant. Actually, you can see it, but like there's this like weird sculpture over. That's Santiago. The 13-dyed fish god, and in VR you see that same like sculpture, except he's like a living breathing fish god. And you get to dance with him, and if you touch his eyeballs it makes music. So it's a weird wacky game. And so I got that idea and made that with a bunch of friends, and then in the process of like sharing our work by going to like conventions and stuff, we went to like Indiecade, and I met other indie developers, and I learned more about the community, and I was like, this is so cool. Like when I thought about games, I always thought it was like AAA games and like shooters, and I was like not interested in that. But then I was looking at everyone's like really artsy games, and I was like, wow. And like the Indiedev community is really welcoming and nice, and I made a lot of friends in there. And so that kind of got me like more into that. And there's also an indie dev community at USC that I got to know. And then Chrysalis was just kind of like, I guess, another like gateway drug into like games. So I didn't really plan on making Chrysalis either. Just my friend told me about this like Oculus grant. And I was like, that's cool. So I applied for this program and then completely forgot that I applied for this program. And I get an email from Oculus one day, and I was like, oh, like they're probably just trying to get me to buy a Rift or something. But I open it and they're like, congrats, you've got into like Oculus Launchpad. And I was like, what's that? And then I was like, oh shoot, I applied for this, like completely forgot. So they flew me out to San Francisco, and I go through this like 2-day boot camp, which is super cool. They have like 100 like developers there, and we're all technically like competition. But we're all friends, really. It's like a huge family. And they gave us 3 months to create a VR game or a VR anything. It doesn't have to be a game. And then we pitch it to them, and then they'll pick a few projects to fund. So I was like, oh, shoot.
It's like, real now.
It's real now. I was like, what have I gotten myself into? But I don't know. I always just draw weird creatures, and I have these like dumb stories just floating around in my mind. So I was like, you know what? Something that I haven't seen in VR yet. Okay, actually, I've seen a few, but something that VR doesn't have enough of yet is just like fun bite-sized experiences that you kind of just like sit in for like an hour, have a good time, and then just plop back into real life. So I just wanted to create kind of a weird, wacky, just game that doesn't make any sense. That's just a lot of fun to play, that you can just take an hour out of your day because, I don't know, people are stressed. Jump in, have a good time, and jump out, you know? There's something that's like fun and comfortable for anybody to play, because I've played a lot of like VR games and like they stress me out, especially like shooters. And so I thought this would be a good way for people just to like unwind. And yeah, so I worked on that. I worked on like a demo for that for 3 months, and then pitched it to Oculus, and somehow it got chosen for funding. So yeah, that's kind of how I got deeper into like indie dev. So through Oculus Launchpad, I met more people, and then yeah, so that's kind of how it all started.
That's a great story. You mentioned kind of getting involved in the indie community and seeing some other games that were inspiring to you. So what were some of those games that really kind of were inspirational to you. I don't. You didn't really mention if games have been something that you've played before. So we usually ask if people had a game that was kind of their like, I want to make games. But it sounds like you kind of came at the indie dev scene from a different path. So
Yeah, I was actually never a gamer. Like the only game I really played when I was little was like Animal Crossing, and
that's a solid one. Come
like,
on.
Animal Crossing, Wild World,
Yeah.
and like Sonic Rush, because my sister and I shared a DS, and then we played whatever game my dad happened to get on sale. So that was cool. But I actually didn't play games until I started making games, which is kind of like super backwards. And I guess the games that inspired Chrysalis, they're like on far ends of the spectrum. So one game that was really inspirational was Gone Home. Have you played that? So that's kind of a weird inspiration because it's such a serious, like,
It really is.
game, and Chrysalis is just like super weird. But I drew inspiration more of like for storytelling on Home, how how you're like going through the corridors and you're like clicking on objects and you're trying to find things, and like there's things you can click on that you don't need to, but if you do and you read it thoroughly, you kind of get more of the story out of it, but you're not necessarily like forced to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's something I really enjoyed about that game. And so I did that with Chrysalis too, where I know there's a lot of people that like they don't like to read things, they don't like to hear dialogue, so I'm like, fine, like just skip it all and do the actiony part. But for people that really want to like, I guess, dive more into the world of Chrysalis, they can like look around, like look at the props, look at all the things that took forever to model, you know? And that's what I really liked about Gone Home. It had like a structure, but also you felt like you had agency in the game. And I think that's really important for VR, is that people feel like they're actually there. So I don't really want to force people to do anything unless it was absolutely necessary. And another inspiration was Accounting VR. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
So it's a super wacky game by Crows and Squanch Tendo, which is Justin Roiland's company.
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot of the characters are voiced by Justin Roiland, and it's like the most ridiculous gamer. It's called Accounting, but it has nothing to do with accounting. Just like a bunch of weird shit happens in that game. So you start off as like an accountant, but then you somehow like enter VR, but you've messed up this like world, and you have to enter like different like VR worlds, and like weird thing happens. And I liked the game for its absurdity. Like nothing made sense. Like you enter this like world, and this like weird like white ball is like screaming profanities at you, and it just like I just thought it was like the funniest thing ever. And it's also super bite-sized. I think I played it in maybe 30 minutes, but it was such a profound 30 minutes of my life, like I don't think I gained much from it, but like I had a good time, and it was like I laughed, and so
that's worthwhile.
Yeah, I thought so. So I kind of want to just like combine that, and like I'm also really influenced by TV. I think that comes from like the animation background. Honestly, like I think everything in my life that I've ever made is probably inspired by SpongeBob. Maybe that's like where the love for fish and like water comes from. I don't know. I was like the biggest SpongeBob fan. Like I'm 22 and my like bed sheets are still SpongeBob. Like,
hardcore fan.
Yeah. But yeah, and like Rick and Morty. I watched a live stream that somebody did of Chrysalis. And he was like, "This reminds me of Rick and Morty," and I was like, "Yes,
yeah,
like, that's what I want."
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then to kind of bring this to a close, that's the question we ask every indie dev we talk to. What are some of the other indie projects out there that have captured your attention, either that are just out or in development, kind of wherever they stand? What has captured your eye in the indie dev scene?
So, a company that I really, really love is Tender Claws, and like I swear I'm like not biased, even though I interned there, but they make like the coolest VR AR games. Have you heard of virtual reality?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so they made virtual reality, and then they just released an AR AI like also fish game. That's actually how we bonded, but fish game made for mobile, and it's super cool and funny, and you should definitely play that. But I don't think this other game has been like talked about yet, so I can't like talk about it, but they're making another VR game, and it's I think one of the coolest VR games I've ever seen.
Ooh.
And it's probably going to be released I think sometime next year, but it's so cool, and I got to work on it this summer, and I'm so excited for it.
Ooh, it's mysterious.
Yeah, it's mysterious.
teaser for people to be interested
Got
in.
tender claws. But also another one of my friends at USC, I don't think this has been released online either, but she's making a really cool AI kind of, or not AI, sorry, AR kind of mafia like game called Hacker. Oh, and her name's Catherine Chen. Plug for her. But that should be coming out soon. She's making it as part of the Advanced Games project at USC. It's like a multiplayer, like you play with a bunch of your friends, and the art is like so good, so good for it, and it's really fun to play. So I'm excited for that too.
Awesome. Those are two great ones. Even if they're a bit mysterious, that's good. Get people interested in stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Brenda Chen, thank you for taking a little bit of time to talk to us about your game Chrysalis. Like we said, we'll have a link down in the description below, so you can check that out if you're interested.
Cool. Thank you so much for interviewing me.